Hey folks, today we're going to check out this specific error where you have a run and your run has been cancelled or ran into an error that talks about some sort of memory, your run exceeded the memory limitation. If you look at the bill, you can see that the same thing happened here. Essentially, there's been some logs that says your run has run out of memory. We're going to see why that happens. And most commonly, that's because you are retrieving too much data back into dbt. Now, in order to find out which model is really the problem when you have many models, can be quite a bit challenging. So essentially, we're trying to find out a log line that has this start, but not a success. And when you have kind of hundreds of models, that can be pretty tricky. So what we can do is we can go to our console our logs. So let me download that again. Go to console logs. And here we kind of want to find the first console log that does not have a success. I'm going to copy this and got a little thing here that tells me the first, this model bar here, there was a start and there wasn't a matching log line. So I know that bar is the problem. Okay, so if I go to my run, go to my debug logs, and I try and look at when that's finished, debug. So I try to find bar. Okay. So we can see model bar. This is model bar going. Okay, so there's this query here that ran select nation key from a particular table. And we see that we actually brought 10 million rows back into dbt, right? Success, 10 million. Now, unfortunately, here it's quite handy, I think, because we can see here thread 2, success 10 million, and it's pretty close to the funding model, but sometimes it's not the case. So here it's pretty straightforward. I can see model bar fetched 10 million rows back, and the run ran out of memory. Okay, so let's go and see what is within that bar model, and let's see how we can try and fix it. So I'm going to change my branch to test large, and the model that we wanted to look at is model bar. So if I look at model bar, we can see what we're trying to do here is we have a run query operation, and the run query is trying to fetch data from this suppliers table. And once data is retrieved, we are essentially doing a unique over the results that we have returned, So if I try to run this in Snowflake itself, let's see how many rows we get back. So it is going to be kind of 10 million rows as the debug logs shown. Okay, so here it says 10 million rows. So we have retrieved 10 million rows. However, do we actually need 10 million rows? Let's see. So there's only 25 distinct values for S nation key. So essentially, there's no reason why we needed to bring back 10 million rows in the first place, right? So if you bring back 10 million rows, DBT is going to run out of memory and your run is going to crash. Now, let's see this model in action here. If you try to build this model, So we can see that we've essentially ran into an error, and it says that you have essentially ran out of memory, which is pretty much the same thing in the run itself. So here we went to this table and we have retrieved 10 million rows back into dbt. And because we brought 10 million rows back, then dbt has ran out of memory. Okay, so it's not really just about running. Just now I did dbt build, which is running the model, but this can also happen if we compile, right? So if I press compile, in order to have a look at the output, you can see that something's happening. And I think it didn't seem like it worked properly, right? So we essentially also have a problem here. If we do a compile, I think the error will be kind of more obvious. You can see here, things are going. Again, when we compile a model, whether with the button or we type dbt compile, first we need to do the run query stuff. We have retrieved 10 million rows back, and again, we have ran out of memory, right? As you can tell from kind of this query, it's really not necessary to fetch 10 million rows back and then get the unique set of destination keys, because really there's only 25 rows here. So we should be basically passing a distinct keyword into our query here in order to get, instead of trying to get 10 million rows, get only 25 rows. Okay, so let's see what happens now. If I have changed the run query to only be 25 rows, hopefully it works. And there we go. So now our model compiles correctly. And then when we do a build, if we look at the logs that show up here, everything works as expected. And the reason here is we ran the query, and instead of doing 10 million rows, we get only 25 rows, which is much smaller. And really, this is the only thing that's necessary. So 25 rows versus 10 million rows, and you can see why we ran out of memory here. So the moral of the story is that you shouldn't try to fetch too much data back into dbt side. Make sure you push down the calculation, push down as much as you can back into Snowflake or your data warehouse, instead of fetching like 10 million rows back and then checking for the unique values here. Now, something to call out is it doesn't only happen to run query. So some users, I know, use dbt utils, and they use something like get column values or something. So get column values is essentially the same thing. Get column values and this kind of load results. These are kind of all wrappers of the same thing, right? It's all wrappers for the same stuff. Essentially, they're going to go to database. It's going to retrieve lots of rows, and you're going to run out of memory. So it's very important that if you're running out of memory, find the offending model, find your debug logs, whether it's in the run that I did before, or even in the IDE, and you can see that, hey, success number, this tells me that I retrieved 10 million rows back. And given the way that we are using this, there's almost no reason that we should have had to fetch 10 million rows back in the first place. Okay, so let's go and commit this. Commit our change to the branch. Let's go back to our failed job run. And let's go and run it again. And hopefully now, without doing 10 million rows, things work as expected. going. Building hundreds of models. And going. And we got a green here, right? So this run pretty much finished. Let's give it a refresh just to double check. And we got a green. So our dev model, everything looks fine. So don't retrieve 10 million rows when we don't need it. As in this case, right? Not necessary to retrieve 10 million when 25 will do, because you're going to run out of memory on the DVD side. Okay, so that's the first scenario where you run out of memory. Now let's look at a different scenario. Now I'm going to go to one of my other staging jobs here. The build worked fine, right? No problem, because I've already fixed up, the 10 million versus 25 rows here in my build command. The problem here is essentially during this docs generate stuff. So when we are docs generating, the docs generation itself is running out of memory, and we can see a log line that's like this. Keep in mind the run is still passing, except the docs is failing. So let's download the debug logs and let's see what's happening here. Okay, so as I'm looking through my debug logs for the docs generation step, what we see is dbt is fetching tables from schemas that it knows of, right? We can see on here. So for example, we have gone to this schema and we have retrieved 5,000 tables, because there's how many tables are in it. Also, so you can see success, as you know from before, success 5,000 and so on. This means like we brought back 5,000 rows. Now, if we keep going, we start to see this introspection queries. You can see dbt sends a bit tables as, and then it goes to a database information schema, and it retrieves data about a table and the column. And again, we should be able to see some log lines that say success, for example, here. So we can see dbt for this query, 09. So dbt went to a database called int_a, and it retrieved metadata from a schema called dev, and it retrieved 150,000 rows. Now, and you can see here, this one is 250,000 rows and so on. So if we do there's a quick check here, cat So if we do a quick check here, you can see that, we have retrieved 250,000 rows, 250,000 rows. And the reason for that is when dbt does a docs generate, it goes and runs a query like this, which is to introspect a database. So if I try and run this query in Snowflake, so if I try and run a query like this, let's see how many rows we get back. It take a while because I have, so this will be database int b. If you look at int b, so here, schema is dev, and you can see there's 250,000 rows, right? So what happens here is, even though you have only one table that's being put in the dev schema in this database, dbt is going to run an introspection schema. It's going to retrieve everything, in this case 250,000 rows, because for each table and column you are going to get one row, right? So then we are going to run out of memory just like we did before, right? Remember that anytime you're fetching too much data back into dbt land, that is when you are going to run out of memory. So if I change to the other branch where I was looking at that docs issue. So here I've specifically specified this because I know this scenario. Here, my int model, I've got one intermediate model A, one intermediate model B, and so on and so forth. However, each of them are going into this database and this dev schema. And we know by running a query like this, we're going to retrieve 250,000 rows. So if I have 5 different database and schemas, each with 250,000 rows, then we are going to make DBT retrieve essentially, 1.25 million rows of data, even though I only have one table with one column. So it really should just be 5 rows, right? So moral of the story here is you want to make sure DBT is not writing to a database that is very busy, right? So what I'll do here is I'm going to change the database to one of my other ones. For example, perhaps this one where I know it's not that many objects. And just this will tidy things up. So I'm going to commit this. This busy schema. Okay. And then if I go back to that run, where I had the docs going, which is this one. So I'm going to run this again. And hopefully this time we don't fail. Doing a build. Double check where I put my stuff in the meantime. MJU, that's JU. I think there's also quite a lot of stuff in here. But let's see if just switching out from the int A, B, C, D, E databases, if that's sufficient to not run out of memory. If not, we will try to change things up again. So here it doesn't look like we've run out of memory because this says building catalog, and I believe the other one possibly we didn't even get there. Oh, we did get there. But let's hope that this passes. Okay, and then I got a green check mark on this one. So looks like this one worked fine. And we failed on this other one with the docs generate running out of memory because we have used the database or schemas that were really busy. So now if I download this debug logs and open it up, have a look. So if you look at this kind of side by side, okay. So we see that from the previous one, we tried to fetch like quite a lot more data. For example, 250,000 here, 250,000 here. However, for the new one, we still have a lot of rows. For example, 150,000 here. But combine these two is less than however much this is. So this is just kind of another scenario where you would run into a memory problem. Basically, you have specified a database and schema, and your database and schema has lots of stuff in it. For example, in this int dev schema, I know I have 5,000 tables here, and I've purposely made it that way so that we run out of memory. And you can see here as well, we run this introspection schema. This introspection schema has written 250,000 rows. So if you fetch 250,000 rows over and over again, or just millions of rows back into DBT, just like the case before, where we were doing run query, anytime you fetch millions or hundreds of thousands of rows, then you kind of expect DBT to run on memory. So for the cases where docs generate is run on memory, you kind of do the same as you would for a run. Look at the logs, look at how many rows you're fetching back, what is the query that is essentially causing this blowout. And so I've reduced the row count from double 250,000 to just a single kind of 150,000 here. And that looks like it fits within a DBT Cloud's memory limitation and allowed my docs to succeed as expected. So the recap is there's many scenarios where you potentially could run into this problem, being memory not enough. One is if you are fetching data back, then make sure you are doing a distinct on the data so that you don't try to fetch too much. Again, it's not exclusive to run query. It's sometimes, like I said, could be a macro, but the idea is that you are fetching too much back. So make sure you limit the amount of data you're fetching from DBT. Make sure you push all the calculation, all the large calculating and stuff back into your warehouse, like we have done here. And also for docs, try not to use really busy databases or schemas, and you should be fine. Thank you.